Your logic is controlled by emotion. Hume exposed the truth we like to believe we think first and feel second. That in the great courtroom of our mind, reason is the judge and emotion is the unpredictable witness. But what if that belief is backwards? What if your logic, the very thing you pride yourself on, the thing you use to make decisions, to argue, to judge right from wrong, is not the master of your mind, but the servant of your feelings? That's the uncomfortable truth David Hume handed to the world centuries ago. He didn't shout it, he didn't market it, but he laid it bare with a sense of devastating clarity. Reason is, and ought only to be, the slave of the passions. And ever since, the smartest people have been trying to either deny him or prove him wrong. And they can't, because deep down, what he said wasn't just intellectually provocative, it was existentially true. Let's be honest, we all like to imagine ourselves as rational creatures. It's flattering. It gives us a sense of control. We want to believe our opinions are based on evidence, our values are grounded in logic, and our decisions are the result of clear thinking. But look closer. Think about the last big decision you made. The job you took, the relationship you stayed in or left, the belief you changed or refused to. Did logic really lead the way, or did you choose what felt right and then build your logic around that feeling? That's not weakness. That's not failure. That's humanity. And Hume was one of the first philosophers courageous enough to say it out loud. He didn't say reason was useless. He didn't say we should abandon thinking. What he said was far more nuanced and far more dangerous to the modern ego. He said reason is a tool, a processor. It takes what we already want, what we already feel, and helps us get it, justify it, or explain it. But it doesn't choose the goal. Emotion does. Passion does. Our desires, fears, instincts, those are the real drivers. And if you watch closely, you'll see this dynamic play out not just in your own life, but everywhere. People don't vote with reason, they vote with identity. People don't fall in love with logic, they fall in love with stories. And when those stories get threatened, it's not reason that comes to the rescue, it's emotion, masked as intellect.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Now, why does this matter? Because if we don't understand how emotion shapes logic, we become its victim. We think we're being rational when really we're just being reactive. We think we're being objective when really we're just defending something we already feel attached to. And the more intelligent we are, the more dangerous this gets. Because smart people are very, very good at constructing airtight arguments to justify emotional impulses. They can make almost anything sound reasonable. But sounding reasonable isn't the same as being right. Hume's insight wasn't just theoretical, it was practical. He was saying, if you want to understand human behavior, your own or someone else's, you have to look beneath the logic. You have to ask, what emotion is driving this thought? What desire is shaping this belief? What fear is hiding behind this conclusion? That's where the truth lives, not in the syllogism, but in the soul. Think about outrage culture. Think about cancel culture. Think about political polarization. What's really happening there? Are people actually debating the content of ideas? Or are they defending emotional attachments, belonging, identity, tribe, power? These are feelings. Logic is just the language we use to protect them. And the scary part is, we often don't even know we're doing it. We believe our own reasoning. We're convinced it came first. But neuroscientists, psychologists, and philosophers are all converging now on what Hume saw centuries ago: emotion fires first. Logic follows after. Here's a question to sit with. What if your most strongly held opinions aren't the result of deep truth, but deep emotional investment? What if your logic is just a beautifully decorated shield hiding a much more fragile feeling you're afraid to face? That's not an insult. That's an invitation. Because once you realize your logic is shaped by emotion, you can begin to question it honestly. You can ask not just, is this true? But why do I want it to be true? That second question is the doorway to real wisdom. We live in a world that rewards certainty and that punishes doubt. That mistakes confidence for clarity. But if Hume was right, and he was then the path to genuine understanding begins with humility. But the humility to admit that we're not thinking machines who feel. We're feeling creatures who think. And until we embrace that, we'll keep building false castles of reason on emotional sand and wondering why they always collapse. The myth of rational morality, why your ethics are emotional, not logical. We love to believe our morality is rational, that our sense of right and wrong is the result of deep thought, careful reasoning, and universal principles. We talk about justice, fairness, equality as if they are timeless truths discovered through logic, like mathematical formulas. But what if they're not? What if your morality isn't built on reason at all, but on something far more primal, far more emotional? This is exactly what David Hume argued, and it shook the foundations of Western philosophy. But, he said, in no uncertain terms, that morality is not derived from reason. It comes from feeling, from sentiment, from emotion, and once you really understand what that means, it changes everything, not just how you see ethics, but how you see yourself. Let's start with a simple but uncomfortable observation. You don't reason yourself into caring about suffering. You feel it. When you see a child crying, you don't calculate whether compassion is logical. You just respond. When someone you love is in pain, you don't build a moral argument before you reach out to help. The impulse comes first. The logic comes later. And that's Hume's whole point. He's not saying reasoning has no place in ethics. He's saying it's not the origin. It's the servant, not the source. Morality begins in the gut, in that visceral, emotional reaction to what we perceive as right or wrong. Modern neuroscience backs him up. Studies show that when people make moral decisions, the emotional centers of the brain light up before the areas associated with logical reasoning. This suggests that your moral compass isn't a product of cold calculation, but of warm, instinctive response. Then, after the emotional judgment is made, your brain works to justify the decision with logic. In other words, you don't reason your way to morality. You rationalize your morality after the fact. This leads to a shocking conclusion. Your deepest moral convictions might not be as objective as you think. They might be shaped by childhood experiences, cultural narratives, personal fears, or emotional wounds. You might believe something is universally wrong, not because it violates logic, but because it violates you. And yet, like everyone else, you wrap that emotional reaction in a blanket of reason, making it sound impersonal and absolute when in fact it's deeply personal. Let's test this. Think of a moral issue you feel strongly about. Maybe it's animal rights. Maybe it's wealth inequality. Maybe it's free speech. Now ask yourself, why do you care? Not in terms of argument, but in terms of experience. What happened in your life that made this issue feel personal? What part of your identity is tied to this value? What emotion do you feel when someone disagrees with you about it? If you're honest, you'll find something raw beneath the rhetoric. A wound, a memory, a fear, a hope. That's not weakness. That's the source of your morality. And it's time we stop pretending it's not there. This isn't just about personal ethics, it explains political division, cultural conflict, and even spiritual disagreement. But people on opposite sides of a debate often think the other side is irrational. But the truth is more complex. Both sides are reasoning, but they're reasoning from different emotional starting points. They need different fears, different loyalties, different experiences of pain. And until we recognize that, we'll keep talking past each other, convinced that we're being logical while the other side is not, when in fact, we're both just defending different emotional truths. Hume wasn't trying to destroy morality. He was trying to save it from the illusion that it could be reduced to logic. He believed that once we admit morality is emotional at its core, we can begin to understand each other more deeply. We stop pretending our values are neutral and start exploring why we feel what we feel. But that's where empathy begins. That's where real moral growth happens. So here's the question: if your morality is shaped by emotion, how do you know it's right? That's a hard question, but it's the only one worth asking. Because if we ignore the emotional roots of ethics, we become rigid and dogmatic. We mistake our feelings for facts. But if we acknowledge those roots, we gain the power to examine them, even challenge them. We stop using logic as a weapon and start using it as a mirror. In the end, Hume didn't destroy the idea of morality. He made it more human. He reminded us that the heart is not the enemy of the mind, it's the origin. And if we want to build a better moral world, we don't need less emotion. We need more honest emotion, more conscious feeling. Because it's not logic that makes us care about right and wrong. It's the feeling that someone, somewhere matters. The hidden architect, how emotion shapes every belief you defend as rational. There's a myth we carry quietly, protectively, that the beliefs we hold dearest are the result of reasoned thought. We think we chose them. We think we examined the options, weighed the evidence, and reached conclusions through logic. But what if that's not how belief works? What if, before a belief is ever articulated, it is felt? What if the convictions we defend most fiercely are not conclusions we arrived at, but emotional attachments we've rationalized after the fact? This is the uncomfortable truth David Hume hinted at, and it's the one we most often ignore, that emotion is not just a part of belief, it is the architect of belief. It builds the frame, lays the foundation, and sets the tone. Logic merely decorates what emotion has already constructed. Think about it. You didn't reason your way into most of your core beliefs. Whether it's your stance on religion, politics, human nature, or even your sense of purpose in life, those beliefs were shaped far more by your environment, your upbringing, and your emotional experiences than by some detached, analytical process. You absorbed them. You felt them. You learned them through stories, through relationships, through moments of joy or trauma. Then, later, you began to explain them. You built structures of logic around them. But the structure wasn't the source. It was the support. Once you see this, everything changes. You realize that even your rational opinions are laced with emotion. Your belief in free will or determinism, in capitalism or socialism, in optimism or cynicism, it all reflects something deeper. A feeling. Maybe it's a desire for control. Maybe it's a fear of chaos. Maybe it's a longing for justice, or a resentment of authority, or a need to feel safe, seen, or significant. These emotions shape the architecture of your worldview. And your logic? It gets to work after the fact, furnishing the interior, painting the walls, adding the finishing touches. This doesn't mean we're rational. It means we're human. It means belief is not a sterile process, it's intimate, vulnerable, alive. And the danger comes when we pretend otherwise. When we convince ourselves that our beliefs are purely rational, we become blind to the emotional forces that actually sustain them. We stop questioning. We stop listening. We start defending emotionally charged positions as if they were objective facts. And we do it so convincingly that we forget we're even doing it. Hume's insight here is subtle but profound. He's not saying logic is useless. He's saying logic is directionless without emotion. It doesn't tell you what to believe, it just helps you get better at defending what you already believe. And most of the time, what you already believe is rooted in emotional experience. That's why people can believe wildly different things and still feel like they're being rational. And they are. But they're reasoning from different emotional premises. This explains so much of the conflict in our world. People clash not just because they disagree, but because they're emotionally invested in different worldviews. And when those emotional investments are challenged, it doesn't feel like a disagreement, it feels like a threat. That's why debates so often turn into battles. You're not just attacking an idea, you're touching a nerve. And until we recognize that, we'll keep mistaking emotional defense for logical argument. So, here's a question that cuts deep. What belief do you hold most strongly, and what emotional event in your life might have shaped it? If you trace it back, you'll often find a story, a moment, a relationship, a fear or hope that planted the seed long before the logic grew. And if you're brave enough to see that, you gain something powerful, the ability to re-examine your beliefs, not just intellectually, but emotionally. You can ask yourself not just, is this belief true, but is it still serving me? Is it still honest? Is it still mine? This is what real philosophical inquiry looks like. But it's not about winning arguments. It's about peeling back the layers of belief to see where they come from. It's about holding your convictions with clarity and compassion, understanding that everyone, including you, is navigating life with a mind shaped by feelings. And that's not a flaw, it's a feature. It's what makes belief meaningful in the first place. But in the end, Hume wasn't trying to undermine belief. He was trying to humanize it. He was asking us to look beneath our logic and find the emotional stories we've forgotten we're telling. Because when you do, you don't just understand your beliefs better, you understand yourself. And that's where wisdom begins. The emotional engine of the mind, why you'll never think clearly until you feel clearly. For centuries, we've been told that thinking clearly means separating ourselves from emotion. That to be truly rational, we must strip away our feelings like fog from a windshield. Only then can we see the truth. But what if that idea is exactly backwards? What if clarity of thought doesn't come despite emotion but through it? What if your ability to think clearly is directly linked to your ability to feel clearly? This is the insight few want to accept because it demands vulnerability. It demands that we stop treating emotion as noise and start recognizing it as signal. And Hume, again, was ahead of us all. He didn't just claim that emotion influences reason, he showed us that emotion powers it. Emotion is the engine of the mind. And if that engine is running on confusion, fear, or repression, no amount of logic will save you from distorted thinking. Let's put this in practical terms. Think about a time you were overwhelmed, angry, anxious, heartbroken. Did your thinking get sharper or blurrier? Did logic come easily, or did it become a servant of your emotional state? Chances are, your thoughts didn't become more objective, they became more reactive. You started projecting, assuming, defending. Your reasoning didn't disappear, it transformed into a tool for emotional survival. But you looked for evidence that supported the emotion you were feeling, and you ignored what contradicted it. That's not a failure of intelligence, it's the default setting of the human mind. But here's the twist, it works in both directions. If your emotions are clear, if you're grounded, open, at peace, your reasoning becomes clearer too. You become less reactive, more curious. You don't grab onto the first idea that makes you feel safe. You listen, you observe, you wonder. The mind in that state becomes a mirror instead of a weapon. It reflects reality instead of distorting it. And that's where true philosophical thinking begins, not with logic alone, but with emotional clarity. This is why the smartest people can still make terrible decisions. It's not that they lack reasoning skills, it's that their emotional engine is full of unresolved tension. Pride, insecurity, fear of being wrong, need for control. These feelings hijack the mind and dress themselves in logic. And unless we confront them directly, our thinking will always be warped by what we refuse to feel. That's why some of the most dangerous ideas in history weren't born from stupidity, they were born from emotional blindness wrapped in intellectual brilliance. So what do? How do we think clearly in a world where emotion is inescapable? The answer isn't suppression, it's integration. You must learn to feel deeply and think clearly, not as separate processes, but as one continuous movement. When you feel anger, don't just express it, explore it. When you feel fear, don't just survive it, study it. Ask, what is this emotion trying to protect? What belief is it attached to? What story is it defending? When you feel clearly, you create space to choose, to reflect, to reason without being ruled. This is emotional intelligence at its highest level, not just knowing how to manage feelings, but how to dialogue with them. Because your emotions are not obstacles to truth, they are the thresholds. Cross them, and you'll find a deeper clarity on the other side. Stay afraid of them, and you'll keep mistaking defense for logic, bias for objectivity, and reaction for reason. So ask yourself, what emotion do I avoid most, and how is it shaping my thinking without my consent? That question might just be the most rational thought you've had all week. Because the truth is, your mind is not a calculator. It's a compass. An emotion is the magnetic field it moves through. If the field is distorted, the compass will mislead you no matter how sharp the needle. In the end, Hume didn't reduce reason to emotion, he elevated emotion to its rightful place. He showed us that we can't think clearly until we feel clearly. That clarity is not sterile, it's alive. And the more honestly we feel, the more wisely we think. So the next time you pride yourself on being rational, pause. Look inward. Ask not just what you think, but why you think it. Ask what you're feeling and what it might be trying to teach you. Because until you do, your logic isn't yours. It's your emotion wearing a mask.